You've got your Bibles. I'm going to ask you to turn to 1 Corinthians chapter 10. When you look at the letters that Paul and the others wrote in the New Testament, they were writing letters to new churches, to churches that didn't have the background. Many of them didn't even have a Jewish faith to go back on. It was all something that was so new. And I feel like that in our day and age that we're living in today, we're getting dangerously close to getting back to that mindset, because there are so many today that have just basically removed the aspects of God from the daily life and from the public part of life, that when somebody comes to Christ today, that it's all new. It's all starting over. It's all starting afresh. It's all without the background that a lot of us, others have had. Even in society, not growing up in church, there was so much of God in society that it was something that wasn't complete stranger for me. I can remember whenever I was in first and second grade going to school in Laredo, and, we started off the day with prayer. We always had grace before we went to lunch. And I guess I wasn't sensitive enough to be offended by that, like today's people. And so today, there's so many young people that are being raised that have no idea what Christianity really is all about, and God is just some mystical thing that people talk about, but they don't have a clue on. And so what I'm trying to say is it looks like that things are coming around full circle. What the New Testament church started with was a new concept that Christ paid the price for all of our sins. He did it on Calvary. He did it to give us freedom from sin, to victory over sin, to have a new life with Him, to have a better way of life, so that we could live better, but then we could also share that with others. And it was something so new and different than anything they'd ever been exposed to, that, there was so many opportunities for error to come in. There were so many opportunities for false teachings to come in. There were so many opportunities for taking something for granted to come in. And that's why we have all the letters. And today, I think that we're getting back to that same point, to where when a person comes to Christ that has not been raised in a Christian home, for example, that because of the way society has pushed God out, that it's all a whole new start. And it's a whole new way of life. And we need the letters of the New Testament just to kind of bring us back around so that we can get off on the right foot and keep going in the right direction. In this passage of Scripture, Paul is writing to the church in Corinth, and the title of mine is Avoid Israel's Mistakes. And so I want to start reading this, and I'm going to just break it down into a few sections. First 5 verses. For I do not want you to be unaware, brethren, that our fathers were all under the cloud, and all passed through the sea. And all were baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea. And all ate the same spiritual food, and all drank the same spiritual drink. For they were drinking from a spiritual rock which followed them, and the rock was Christ. Nevertheless, most of them God was not well pleased, for they were laid low in the wilderness. In this passage of Scripture is referring to the Israelites as they have come out of Egypt, and they were baptized by the cloud. Now, to make it clear, to be baptized means to be immersed in, to just be enveloped in. That's why baptism is a laying and burying in the water and being raised anew. There's nothing about, and I don't mean to offend anybody, but there's nothing about sprinkling that has anything to do with baptism. But to be immersed, to be buried in it and brought up. He is saying that the Israelites coming out were baptized in the cloud. In other words, they were immersed in the cloud. When they left Egypt and were heading to the Red Sea, God lit the way, and they followed the cloud until they got to the part of the Red Sea. When they got to the Red Sea, by that time the Egyptian army and the Pharaoh and his chariots were in pursuit. And so God moved behind them and placed darkness in the paths of the Egyptians, but on the front side of it was a pillar of fire that lit the way. Whenever they got to the part of the Red Sea, the first thing that people said, if you go back and you read that, they said, what, was there not enough graves in Egypt for us to be buried that we have to die out here? We should go back. And God says, no. And he told Moses, he says, raise your staff. And whenever he did, the walls of the Red Sea, which you guys I'm sure are all familiar with, they parted. And an east wind blew all night and dried up all the mud. Now the pillar of the darkness that kept the Egyptians away was also the pillar of light on the front side that lit the way. So that come morning, the Israelites all marched through the Red Sea with a wall of water on both sides. Can you even fathom what that would have been like? To just go through and see those walls of water, and I'm sure that there were many who thought, first drop and I'm out of here, First drop I feel, I'm out of here. I'm just going to get out of here somehow or another. And to see that massive display, and yet they was able to cross through the water, another symbol of baptism, and come out on the other side. Now we also know that by the story of this, that the Egyptians, whenever they came to the part of the Red Sea, that God allowed them enough light so that they could come down into the Red Sea in pursuit. But whenever the last Israelite stepped up on the shore, then God brought the waters back down. God had delivered them not only through the cloud of darkness and the pillar of fire, but also if you go to looking through that, it says whenever they got down into the bottom of the Red Sea, wheels started falling off of the chariots. The horses started stumbling. God slowed them down so that they would not catch up. And then he completely erased, you might say, the Egyptian army. Now then, that's not just a story. That's not just a story that we tell our kids, and we all try to think, oh well, that's a really nice story, but did it really happen? Well, whenever the divers have been down the last 30, 40, 50 years to search that area that was believed, guess what they found? Parts of chariots. Did that just happen upon that? No. But the people still were having trouble grasping what had just happened. They went to Mount Sinai. Moses went up, and that's where he received the 10 Commandments. Do you remember what the people did at that point? They took their gold and they gave it to Aaron, and he created what was known as the golden calf. And they started celebrating the pagan religions of the land and of what they had seen in Egypt, and it was just like they decided that golden calf was now their God. They quickly forgot how they got to where they were. And whenever you've got so much of your past in you, it's hard to live in the present without dragging all that with you. It says they sat down to eat, but they got up to play. They took in all the benefits and all the blessings that God had for them, but then whenever they got up, they soon forgot where all those came from. As they got into the wilderness, they said, we need something to eat. We don't have anything to eat here. You don't expect us to eat all of our sheep. What will we have left? God provided manna. 6 days a week. Every morning when they got up, they could go out and they could gather the manna just like dew setting on the ground. The neat part of it was that no matter how much they gathered up, no matter how much they hoarded, on that day, they had enough for that day. And if they kept it until the next day, when they got up the next morning, it was full of maggots. Except on the day before the Sabbath. That day, they were supposed to go out and get a double portion so that when the Sabbath came, they would already have what they needed. And so, the rest of the week, if they tried to keep some over just for security's sake, it was worthless. But on the day before the Sabbath, when they gathered a double portion and saved part of it back, they always had enough. Now, this was the neat part. They didn't have enough to just survive. They always had enough to meet their need. And they didn't have to work to get it. Whenever they complained because there was no water, God told them to take and get the water from the rock. And he did. And they drank from it. And yet, they still grumbled. They still complained. Keep going. Verse 6. Now these things happened as examples for us, that we should not crave evil things as they also craved. And do not be idolaters, as some of them were, as is written, the people sat down to eat and drink and stood up to play. That is in reference to whenever they was at the base of Mount Sinai, whenever God was up on the mountain, or Moses was up getting the commandments from God. Nor let us act immorally as some of them did, and 23,000 fell in one day. On that time, that was whenever the instance that they are referring to is the Israelites had come into the land of Moab. And they were there for quite some time. Now, just so that you can recognize that God was present with them, that God's cloud stood over the people. And it stood over the tent of meeting. Moses would set up a tent of meeting out away from the rest of the camp. And the cloud of God would set over that tent. And whenever that cloud raised up to move, then they knew it was time for them to pack up and move. Sometimes that cloud would stay for a day. Sometimes it would stay for a week. Sometimes it might stay for a year. But until that cloud moved, they didn't move. Now then, Moses would come to that tent of meeting to meet with God, and it said whenever Moses entered into the tent, the cloud would come down in front of the doorway of the tent. Now, the reason I bring this up is because how much evidence do we need that God is present? And yet, whenever you read the story, all the different stories of the Israelites, you see where they just continually lacked faith, lacked obedience. The 23,000 that fell, the people decided that while they were in Moab, that they had been there long enough that they decided to start taking wives from the Moabites and intermingling, which was strictly forbidden. And because that they had done this, that God sent a plague to them. It got so bad that one of the Israelites brought a Moabite woman that he had married in front of Moses and the whole congregation, just like he was proud of what he had done. And everybody just sat there, just like in shock of what was going on. A grandson of Aaron, who was appalled at this, finally took action, picked up a spear, chased them back to their tents, and killed them. Now then, sounds pretty harsh. I know, but for one, it ended the plague. Second way to look at that is, where would we be today if God had not been so strict when it came to following the rules and following Him? You know, a lot of times we look at the Old Testament and we say, you know, there was just a lot of harshness, there was a lot of cruelty, there was a lot of killing that went on. But where would our beliefs be today if God would have says, well, it's not really what I wanted, but okay, we'll make an exception this time. And that would set a precedence that the next time, well, we'll make an exception this time. And then the next time, well, since we made those other two exceptions, we've got to make another exception this time. And in no time at all, you can't recognize what started it out as. You lose sight of where it began and where it was headed because it's just going like this. It has no direction anymore. And so it wasn't that God was being mean and vindictive, which some people like to portray him, but he was holy. And he was trying to create a holy people for himself. Because he knew what was coming. He knew that Christ was coming on down the line, but he wanted a people that he could call his own and who would recognize him for what he done. And so it was through the disobedience of intermingling with the people that it says the 23,000 fell. Okay, keep going. Verse 9. Nor let us try the Lord as some of them did and were destroyed by the serpents. After winning a major victory, Moses led the people around up by the Red Sea, going around the land of Edom, basically for protection. And during the trip, the people were complaining. You know, this is ridiculous. We are just going around in circles. Well, yeah. But we're just tired of this. We're just tired of this. And they grumbled against Moses. They grumbled against God. And God had enough of it, and he sent serpents throughout the people. And anyone who got bit by a serpent died. Until finally, God says, okay, my anger has subsided. He told Moses, he says, take and create a bronze serpent and put it on a standard and raise it up for all the people that can see. Anyone who was bit by a serpent then and looked upon the bronze serpent that Moses had set up would live. Do you remember in Jesus' time, unless the Son of Man be lifted up, like the serpent in the wilderness, it was the sign of the Christ to come, is what this was. And it was because of their constant grumbling, constant complaining, and constant disobedience. Now keep going. Verse 10. Nor grumble as some of them and were destroyed by the destroyer. This is another reference where 250 people, and if you go back, and I'm getting all these from the book of Numbers. 250 people came with a couple of leaders, and they says, come to Moses, and they says, we don't need you as a leader anymore. We don't like the way you're doing things. We're just had it with you. We are a holy people ourselves. We don't need you leading us. We can do it ourselves. We want to start doing our own thing. We want to start being our own leaders. And Moses fought back the initial anger that was within him, and he says, I'll tell you what, tomorrow morning, we will all bring our fire pans that you brought your incense and you offered sacrifices to God with on the altar. Let's all bring our fire pans with us, and we will offer them before God, you and your people, and I and Aaron will bring ours. And let God choose which one should be leading. When it was all said and done, the leaders that were leading the 250 people were swallowed up by the earth, them and their families and their tents and everything they owned. And then the earth closed back in on them. The other 250 were consumed by fire. Why? Because they thought they were holy enough, good enough, they wanted to do their own thing. Again, this was not God saying, I'm mean, it's going to be my way or the highway. It was God saying, I am holy. I want you to be holy. I want to help you. I want to lead you. I want to bless you. But I cannot bless you when you're in direct disobedience to me. And so he was not trying to just control and stifle them, but he was trying to bring them into a freedom that they had never known. The problem was, with the Israelites at that time, was they were so engulfed in the Egyptian ways of life that they couldn't get rid of those. And they just couldn't comprehend that they had a God that loved them and was bringing them and wanted to bring them into a land that was indeed flowing with milk and honey. Their complaint was, we're not there yet. I don't see any milk and honey flowing around here. Well, the reason they all fell in the wilderness to start with was because whenever Moses tried to bring them in and he sent the spies into the land, they came back, and 10 of the 12 spies says, yeah, there's big people out there, and the cities are fortified. And if we go in, we're going to be like a bunch of locusts, and we're going to be consumed, and we can't do it. The other two, Joshua and Caleb, says, God will deliver us. He will take us in. We must go. And the people said, no, we're not going. We're not going. And at that point, God says, okay, since you're unwilling to go, since you don't have enough confidence and faith in me, all of this generation, 20 years and older, is going to die in the wilderness. And so they spent the next 40 years going around in circles, basically training up the younger generation so that whenever it come the opportunity to cross that Jordan River and go into the promised land again, that they would have the faith and the confidence to do it. So many times when you look at the history of Israel, and God says, I'm just fed up. I'm just going to wipe them all out. And Moses, I'm going to start all over with you. And Moses prayed and pleaded and interceded. And he says, no, please don't, because please don't. Please don't. Give us another chance. I understand why you're feeling that way, but don't do it. Now, Paul is writing this because he's trying to not so much look at the history as it is the motivations behind it. Let me finish up, 11 through 13. Now these things happened to them as an example, and they were written for our instruction, upon whom the ends of the ages have come. Therefore let him who thinks he stands take heed lest he falls. No temptation has overtaken you, but such as is common to man, and God is faithful, who will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you are able, but with the temptation will provide the way of escape also, that you may be able to endure it. The Israelites couldn't get their past out of their present. Their old way of thinking, that it was all up to them. They didn't like being told what to do, but yet, and they always were saying, we should just go back to Egypt. Oh, did you have it good there? No, but we knew what to expect. Did you like it there? No, but we knew what to expect. So why not try for something better? Why not have something that God has ordained and has planned out and has prepared for you, but it's going to require some changes on your part? Now he's talking to a New Testament church, and a New Testament church is saying, we've never worshiped quite like this before. We've never had church like this before. Some of them were probably saying, we've never had church, period. We worshiped one God for fertility. We worshiped one God for crops. We worshiped another one for rain. We worshiped another one for this. We worshiped another one for that. And so, this is all new to us. We don't understand. And what Paul is saying, he says, take a lesson from the Israelites. Look at all of the mistakes that they made because they were following after the own lust of their hearts instead of following after the obedience of God. And try to use that as an example. History is not something that we write to suit our purpose. History is something that we should be gleaning from so that we don't repeat the failures of the past. And that's what he's trying to get through to the church here in Corinth. Be careful that you don't get to the point where you say, I'm good enough the way I am. That I'm holy enough the way I am. I don't need somebody else telling me what to do. But he says, be careful lest you fall. what he's really trying to tell the people, he says what we need to do is try and see if we can't get closer and closer to God instead of seeing how many areas of our life that we can exclude God from. I don't need God in this part of my life because I kind of like it just that way. I don't need God in this part of my life because I like it just that way. But instead, what if we can't just draw a little closer to God and follow in his path, follow in his instructions, and see if we can't avoid some of the pitfalls and things of the past? Now, the temptations were there because, like I mentioned earlier, there were false teachers who were coming in who were trying to take advantage of their, not to be rude, ignorance of not knowing, just their uninformed way of this new belief. And so, since you don't know exactly what all you're dealing with, let me introduce to you what I want to do. And I'll just make it sound like it's coming from God instead of just from me. And so there were many who were trying to lead them away. There was also temptations because they were still living in a pagan-infested world, just like we are today. There are so many temptations out there for each and every one of us to stray, to go chase after this, to go chase after that. And so many of them have been dressed up and dolled up to where we're told and tried to be led astray by saying, oh, it's okay. You know, God, this is the new God. This is the God of today. This is not the God of so many thousand years ago. You know, and so things have changed. This is an updated version. This is God 2.0. And he says, don't fall into that. Yeah, there's temptations out there. There's things out there that look enticing, but in your heart, you know they're not right. Don't fall for it. God will help you if you'll draw closer to him. He will find you a way through it. Just like he did when the Israelites came to the Red Sea and they said, there's a sea here we can't cross. There's an army back here we can't fight. God did not start something he couldn't finish. And he's still in that same business today. What he has started in you, he wants to see to completion. What he has started in me, he wants to see to completion. I know sometimes he looks at me and goes, oh, he's a slow learner. Terrible slow learner. But he wants to see it to completion. And the temptations that to do this or not do this, to indulge in this or not to indulge in that, I know they're real. And what's even more so important is God knows that they're real. Paul knew that they were real. Paul was given the opportunity more times than not to just denounce Christianity and you can go free. You can have your life back. But Paul says, though my life is with Christ. That's the life I've chosen. That's the life, the only life that is worth living. And so if it means that I lose my life so that I might gain my life, then that's how it's going to happen. God wants to finish what he started. He realizes that there's temptations out there that they look so attractive. Just like they did to the Israelites whenever they says, you know, we're holy enough, we don't need you telling us what to do. Just like it did whenever they says, you know, we're getting tired of this manna, and there's something else that we can do. We're not having to work for it, we're not having to provide it ourselves, but you know, we're just getting tired of this. We're getting tired of this. We're getting tired of this. We're complaining, because nothing's ever quite good enough. I have always stressed that until we start praising God for what he's doing, we have trouble really going in faith to him in prayer for what we need. I think a lot of that is the point of this. Whenever we start recognizing what God is doing, I mean, they could see the cloud of God in their life. They saw the locust. They saw the water turn to blood. They saw all the different plagues. And yet, whenever they got out there and things got a little tough, who was the first one they forsook? Can you see God in your life? Can you see God around you in your world? Can you recount any time to where God has brought you or someone you love through a situation that looked almost impossible? Has he changed? Has he given up? Did he quit? God is still performing miracles. Now, maybe they not be like the ones in the New Testament, but God is still doing a work. God is still calling people to follow him. He's paid the path, paid the way through Jesus Christ. All the hard part's already been done. But he's still speaking to hearts today, changing lives, turning them around for his glory, because he wants a people redeemed to himself. You know, Jesus said, I go to prepare a place for you. And if I don't go, because I go, I will be able to call you to where I am, that there you may be also. And I don't want you to get caught up in all of chasing this and chasing that and chasing this and miss it. The more we exclude God from sections of our lives, the more trouble we have finding him whenever we need him. And for, sadly, too many, when they finally figured out that God is still where he belongs, we're the ones who's moved. It's hard to get back, and maybe it's too late. Don't fall into the trap of, and this is what Paul is telling Corinth, don't fall into the trap of chasing after every little thing that comes around. But draw closer to Christ. Let him draw closer to you, and let him take you through. There's going to be some struggles. There's going to be some persecution. There's going to be some problems. But what he started, he'll finish. What he sets out to accomplish will be accomplished. Lord, help me be a part of that. Help me to be walking, maybe not in perfect step, but let me at least be trying to put my feet in the path that you have set out for me to follow. And put on blinders if we have to, so that we're not looking over here, looking over there, saying this is okay when we know it's not, saying this is okay when we know it's not, chasing after this because even though we know we shouldn't. But let us keep following in the path, not because it's the easiest, but because it's the right one. This morning as we've gathered here for worship, I don't know if this message speaks to anybody other than me. But if it does, I pray that you accept it and receive it as it was intended. And that was to just keep us closer to him, because he's the one who's going to ultimately lead us home and take us through the storms, take us through the battles, so that we might have the victory when it's over, just like Lisa's children's moment. As we stand to sing the hymn of invitation, if God's speaking to your heart about any decision you need to make, pray that as we sing the hymn, Just a Little Closer Walk with Thee, that you'll respond accordingly. Number 561, all verses. Let's stand.